The laughter in the Marine Corps training hangar was cruel and sharp, aimed at the pale scars tracing across her cheekbone and down her neck. A captain smirked, asking if the obstacle course had finally left its mark. The other recruits joined in, not knowing those scars weren't from training. They were from a roadside bomb in Fallujah, and they definitely didn't notice the 4-star Admiral at the back of the room, whose face had just gone stone cold, and who was now rising slowly to his feet. Her name was Lieutenant Ilara Vance, the newest and quietest candidate in the Marine Combat Instructor course. But those scars and the Admiral's reaction suggested a story no one in that room knew. This is what happens when a culture built on toughness mistakes trauma for weakness, and why one woman's hidden history was about to force every person present to question everything they thought they knew about honor. The combat instructor course at Camp Lejeune in 2021 was the Marine Corps' most grueling proving ground, a 9-week crucible designed to break even seasoned staff sergeants. For Lieutenant Vance, a military police officer by trade, her presence alone was a statement. She was part of the first wave of women formally integrated into the Corps Premier training units, a move that had sparked intense, quiet resentment within the old guard. Her instructor was Captain David Miller, a 15-year veteran with a chest full of ribbons from Iraq and Afghanistan. To Miller and many of the candidates, Vance was a political checkbox, a risk to the course's infamous 70% washout rate. They saw the scars on her cheek and neck as proof she couldn't handle real combat stress, not knowing their origin was a classified conv ambush outside Fallujah years prior, an event that wasn't in her transfer paperwork. The mockery began subtly. During land navigation, her map was misplaced. During drill instruction practice, her podium was subtly loosened. The culminating moment, the one that sparked the laughter in the hangar, came during close-quarters combat training. Vance was paired with a hulking sergeant named Marcus Thorpe. During a drill, Thorpe's controlled strike went intentionally wide, his glove grazing her scarred cheek. "Oops," he muttered, "not sorry at all. Guess you're already broken in." That's when the laughter erupted from the watching candidates. Captain Miller, from across the mats, didn't reprimand Thorpe. He simply made a note on his clipboard. The message was clear. Toughness here wasn't just physical, it was social, and Vance was failing. What none of them saw was the observer. Admiral William Wild Bill Prescott, the commander of Marine Corps Training and Education Command, was conducting a surprise inspection of the course's new gender integration protocols. He stood in the shadows of the hangar's observation walkway, having watched the entire exchange. Prescott was a legend, a former Force Recon commander whose own career was built on spotting undervalued talent. He saw Thorpe's cheap shot. He saw Miller's tacit approval. And he saw Vance's reaction, or lack thereof. She didn't flinch. She didn't get angry. She simply reset her stance, her eyes cold and focused, a reaction so militarily precise it was more alarming than any outburst. It was the reaction of someone who had measured real violence, for whom a training insult registered as negligible noise. That's when Prescott's expression changed. That's when he stood. The laughter died instantly as 8-5 candidates and instructors registered the 4-star Admiral now on his feet, his gaze fixed on Thorpe and Miller. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of a drill instructor screaming at recruits on the nearby parade deck. Captain Miller, Prescott's voice carried without needing to shout, "A word now." He then turned his eyes to Lieutenant Vance. "You, Lieutenant, remain here." As Miller, pale-faced, followed the Admiral into a side office, the remaining candidates were left in a state of suspended shock. Sergeant Thorpe looked at Vance, confusion and dawning anxiety replacing his smugness. Who was she? The answer lies in a statistic the Corps struggled with. Women in integrated combat training were injured at more than twice the rate of men. A 40.5% injury rate versus 18.8%. Many senior Marines pointed to this as proof women couldn't hack it, but the deeper truth was more complex. The equipment, the training regimens, even the medical assessments were all designed decades ago for the male body. Women like Vance weren't failing the standards. They were being asked to meet standards never designed for them, often breaking themselves in the process. Vance's file, the one Captain Miller had only skimmed, told a different story. Before her MP assignment, she had volunteered for a now-declassified Joint Task Force pilot program testing integrated female teams in special operations support roles. Her deployment was to one of the most hazardous routes in Anbar province. The convoy attack that left her scarred also earned her a Navy Commendation Medal with Valor for pulling 2 wounded teammates from a burning vehicle while under fire. Her recovery and subsequent transfer to the training command was a bureaucratic sideline, her history buried under layers of operational secrecy and an institutional reluctance to highlight a woman's combat success in a still-debated program. Back in the hangar, the candidates shuffled nervously. Sergeant Torres, a respected weapons instructor candidate, approached Vance. "Hey, Lieutenant, look, that was out of line." Vance just nodded, her eyes still on the office door. "What's your deal?" Torres pressed, his curiosity genuine. "You don't react to anything. It's like you're not even here." Vance finally looked at him. "Reacting uses energy, Sergeant. Energy is a finite resource. I save mine for things that matter." Behind the office door, Admiral Prescott was holding up a single sheet of paper. "This, Captain, is a performance evaluation from the Special Operations Command Liaison Office. It pertains to Lieutenant Vance's work in Iraq. The word they use to describe her is unflappable. The word they use to describe her combat first aid under direct fire is superlative. You are laughing at a Marine who has forgotten more about real pressure than your entire candidate pool will ever know." Miller's mouth was dry. "Sir, I had no access to that. Her transfer file only listed MP duty." "Because someone higher up decided her real service was an inconvenient fact," Prescott said, his voice low and dangerous. "And you, instead of inquiring, instead of leading, allowed your candidates to turn this course into a middle school cafeteria. You think this is about toughening them up? It's about institutional cowardice. You're afraid she'll succeed and prove your worldview wrong." Prescott pointed back toward the hangar. "The next evolution is the combat endurance course, correct? The one with the 95% first-time failure rate." "Yes, sir." "Good. Lieutenant Vance will run it today, and you, Captain, will personally evaluate her. Every candidate will observe. Let's see what broken in really looks like." This was the cliffhanger. The combat endurance course was a notorious beast, a 7-mile timed run through obstacle, mud, and simulated stress drills designed to identify the single point of physical or psychological failure. No woman had ever passed it on the first attempt in the instructor course's history. For Vance, still an outsider, with her entire class watching under the Admiral's icy gaze, this wasn't just a test. It was a public execution or a coronation. And as Captain Miller delivered the order to the stunned hangar, the only thing louder than the silence was the unasked question hanging over everyone. What had they just awakened? The combat endurance course, known as the Meat Grinder, was a 7-mile symphony of suffering laid out in the North Carolina Pine Barrens. As Lieutenant Vance took her mark at the start line, the atmosphere wasn't competitive, it was funereal. The other candidates and instructors, including a pale Captain Miller, watched from the observation ridge. They weren't waiting to see if she would fail. They were waiting to see how she would break. The starter's whistle cut the humid air. Vance launched forward not with a sprinter's burst, but with a steady, grinding pace that seemed too slow. Sergeant Thorpe, his arms crossed, smirked. "She's packing for a 10-mile run, not a 7-mile gut check, doesn't even know the course." But Admiral Prescott, standing apart with a pair of binoculars, saw something else. "Watch her gait, Captain," he said to Miller without looking away. "Perfectly economical, no lateral motion. She's running like someone who had to cover 50 miles on foot with a 40-pound pack and no promise of extraction." Miller said nothing. The first obstacle was the mud pits, 50 yards of waist-deep, clay-thick muck. Candidates typically charged in, wasting energy fighting the suction. Vance didn't charge. She entered at an angle, using a modified high step that kept her momentum forward, her body almost horizontal. It was a technique used in jungle and swamp training, rarely taught here. She emerged on the other side with half the fatigue and time of the typical candidate. From the ridge, Sergeant Torres leaned forward. "Did you see that? That wasn't in the manual." Next was the confidence climb, a 40-foot cargo net stretched over a water obstacle. The standard technique was a full-body climb. Vance ascended using only her arms in a precise, alternating pull, her legs dangling. It was a drill for building upper body strength when wearing body armor that restricted leg movement. She reached the top as several male candidates, observing, muttered in confusion. "She's not just strong," Tors whispered. "She's trained different." The course wound into the woods for the navigation and memory stretch. At random intervals, a candidate had to drop and perform a task, assemble a weapon blindfolded, recite the code of conduct from a random article, treat a simulated wound. This was where most failed, their brains fogged by physical exhaustion. When Vance's alert buzzer sounded, she dropped to a knee beside a dummy casualty. The simulated injury was a sucking chest wound. The evaluator, a corpsman, watched as she tore open the dummy's uniform. Her hands didn't fumble. She located the second intercostal space midclavicular line by feel, narrated the steps calmly, and mimed the decompression needle insertion with clinical precision. Then she did something unexpected. She checked the dummy's other side for an exit wound, a habit drilled into those who have seen real ballistic trauma. The corpsman looked up at the observing Captain Miller, his face stunned. "Sir, she just performed a field intervention I'd expect from a seasoned combat medic, not an MP." The course's crucible was the Screaming Mile, a mile-long stretch interspersed with barbed wire crawls, log carries, and simulated artillery blasts from loudspeakers, all designed to trigger a panic response. As Vance entered it, Captain Miller finally spoke to the Admiral. "Sir, with respect, her form is impressive, but this is about heart. This part breaks people." On cue, the recorded sounds of machine gun fire and explosions erupted. Vance didn't flinch or duck. She dropped into the barbed wire crawl, but again, her technique was alien. She used a modified low crawl, pushing with her toes and pulling with his forearms, keeping her profile so low the barbs cleared her back by inches. It was the crawl used to approach an enemy position under direct fire, not to pass a training requirement. Halfway through the Screaming Mile, the course threw its worst mental test, a simulated chemical attack. Alarms blared, strobes flashed, and candidates were required to don a protective mask within 9 seconds while continuing to move. Vance's mask was on in under 3 seconds, the maneuver done without breaking stride, her breathing immediately shifting to the measured, controlled cycles of someone conserving air in a contaminated environment. Admiral Prescott lowered his binoculars. "Captain Miller, how many hours of CBRN mask drills does this course require?" "About 6 hours total, sir." "Lieutenant Vance has likely done 600, Prescott said flatly. "That's not training, that is operational habit." The final obstacle was the 30-foot rope climb over a water pit, the rope greased with lard. Most candidates failed here, their grip gone. Vance stood at the base, looking up. For the first time, she seemed to pause. On the ridge, Thorpe let out a breath. "Here it is, no technique for this, just grip strength, she's done." Vance wiped her hands on her uniform, not on the dirt as others did. She then reached into a small pouch on her belt, a pouch everyone had but few used, and pulled out a small bag of rosin, the kind used by gymnasts and specialized climbers. She coated her hands calmly, looked up, and began to climb. She didn't use the standard leg wrap technique. She used a J-hook footlock method favored by tactical climbers for speed and stability with gear. She ascended the greased rope in 3 smooth bursts, hitting the bell at the top as the entire observation ridge fell completely silent. She finished the course, not with a triumphant sprint, but by crossing the line and immediately moving into a cool-down walk, her hand on her hip to monitor her breathing. The timer stopped. Captain Miller looked down at the official course record sheet in his hand, then at the stopwatch, his face drained of color. Admiral Prescott approached. "Time, Captain." Miller's voice was hoarse. "She beat the course record, sir, by 1 minute and 47 seconds, the record held by a Force Recon candidate in 2018. The Admiral didn't smile. He looked at Vance, who was now quietly rehydrating, her back to the stunned crowd. "The record isn't what's important, it's the asterisk how asterisk. Every technique she used was optimized for survival in a real-world hostile environment, not for scoring points on a training course. She wasn't running the meat grinder. She was treating it as a low-stakes simulation." The candidates were dismissed, buzzing with a chaotic mix of respect, fear, and intense curiosity. Admiral Prescott ordered Vance to report to the course headquarters building. As she walked away, Sergeant Thorpe stared after her, his earlier confidence shattered. Who the hell is she? That was the question now echoing through the entire school. Captain Miller, desperate to regain some control, did what any officer would do. He went to pull Lieutenant Vance's full service record. Sitting at his computer, he typed her name and service number into the Marine Corps Total Force system. The screen flashed. Then a dialog box appeared in bright red letters: access restricted, classified material, required clearance, top secret SCI, request DENIED. Miller sat back, a cold knot forming in his stomach. A top-secret sensitive compartmented information clearance for a military police lieutenant attending a training course? It was impossible, unless her MP designation was a cover. He then remembered the Admiral's words. Someone higher up decided her real service was an inconvenient fact. Meanwhile, in the Spartan headquarters office, Admiral Prescott faced Lieutenant Vance. At ease, Lieutenant, or should I say Sergeant Vance. Vance, who had been standing at parade rest, didn't move a muscle, but her eyes flicked to his. It was the first crack in her composure he'd seen. I did some digging of my own while you were on the course, Prescott continued. The file is buried but not forgotten. Operation Iron Shield, Anbar Province, 2018. A joint task force. You weren't an MP. You were a sergeant serving as a cultural support team member attached to a special operations team. Your convoy was hit by an IED and subsequent ambush. You held a perimeter, provided life-saving aid, and are credited with 3 confirmed enemy kills during the withdrawal. The scars are from that day. The Navy Commendation Medal with Valor is in a safe, not on your uniform, because your entire deployment was classified. Vance remained silent, which was confirmation enough. Why the lie? Prescott asked. Why the transfer to the training command under a watered-down record? For the first time, Vance's stern expression softened into something like weariness. The pilot program was shut down, sir. Politically inconvenient. Everyone involved was quietly reassigned. My options were a desk job or a retraining pipeline. I chose to train Marines. They gave me an MP code and sent me here. And you said nothing. While they mocked you for scars, you earned pulling Marines from a burning vehicle. My mission was never about credit, sir. It was about the mission. This, she gestured vaguely to the course outside, is just another mission. Prescott studied her. He saw the profound disconnect, a warrior of her caliber being subjected to hazing by men who measured toughness by push-ups. He made a decision. Captain Miller will be reporting to my office with your official evaluation. He will also be explaining to the entire candidate corps exactly why they spent 2 weeks mocking a Marine who outqualifies them in every meaningful metric. But that's not enough. The Admiral picked up the phone on the desk. This is Prescott. I need a secure video link to the Pentagon, Office of the Deputy Commandant for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, and I need the Historical Review Officer for Operation Iron Shield on standby. He hung up and looked at Vance. Your mission here is over, Lieutenant. A new one starts now. We're not just correcting a record, we're exposing a systemic failure, and you are going to help me tear it down. But as Prescott initiated his call across base, Captain Miller was making a call of his own. Humiliated and fearful for his career, he wasn't going to wait for the axe to fall. He reached out to a friend in the Pentagon's Public Affairs Office, a major who owed him a favor. His story was simple. A disgruntled female officer was making false claims about a classified service history, and an admiral was being misled. He framed it as a matter of protecting the integrity of awards and records. It was a preemptive strike, designed to muddy the waters and paint Vance as a liar before Prescott's report could land. The major, unaware of the full truth, promised to look into it. With that call, Miller lit a fuse that reached directly into the highest, most political levels of the Marine Corps. The battle was no longer just inside a training hangar. It was about to explode onto a stage where truth and reputation would collide with the full force of institutional power. And Lieutenant Ilara Vance, who just wanted to train Marines in peace, was now the unwilling fulcrum. Within 24 hours of Captain Miller's call, a formal clarification request landed on the desk of the Deputy Commandant for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, questioning the validity of Lieutenant Vance's service record and, by implication, Admiral Prescott's judgment. It was a bureaucratic missile, and it triggered a chain reaction that reached far beyond Camp Lejeune. The Deputy Commandant, Lieutenant General Robert Hale, was a career logistician, not a combat arms officer. He saw the request from the Public Affairs Office, a routine matter on the surface, and initiated a standard review. His staff pulled two files, Vance's sanitized MP record and the classified Operation Iron Shield archive. When they were compared, the discrepancies were glaring, but not in the way Miller had hoped. Instead of exposing a fraud, the review exposed a cover-up. The classified file was overwhelming in its detail. After-action reports, eyewitness testimonies from Special Operations team leaders, and medal citations signed by a three-star general. The MP file was a hollow shell. General Hale was now in a bind. He had an admiral claiming institutional malpractice, a decorated war hero being maligned, and a paper trail leading back to a politically sensitive program the Corps had quietly buried. His instinct was to contain. He called Admiral Prescott. "Bill, this Vance situation is a hornet's nest. The simplest solution is to reassign her, close the investigation, and let the training command continue its work. We can acknowledge her service privately." Prescott's response was ice cold. "Robert, the simplest solution is also the most cowardly. We have a captain who encouraged hazing, a class of future instructors who learned the wrong lesson about leadership, and a system that tried to erase a Marine's sacrifice because it was inconvenient. That's not a hornet's nest. It's a cancer, and I am cutting it out." The standoff between the two flag officers meant the issue was now elevated to the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Samuel Crowder. Meanwhile, the ripple effects hit the training course. Captain Miller, hoping his preemptive strike had worked, attempted to resume training as normal. He called the candidates together the next morning. "The incident with Lieutenant Vance is being handled by higher headquarters. It is not a topic for discussion. Our focus returns to the curriculum." But the candidates were no longer a unified group. Sergeant Torres and a few others had spent the night quietly searching for any public record of Operation Iron Shield. They found nothing, which told its own story. Others, loyal to Miller and Thorpe, viewed Vance with suspicion, buying the rumor that she was exaggerating her record. The candidate corps was split, and the tension was palpable. It was at this moment that the first media inquiry arrived. A defense journalist with ties to the Pentagon Public Affairs Office had caught wind of a controversy surrounding a female Marine's disputed combat record. He emailed the base public affairs officer for comment. The email was forwarded to General Hale's office, and from there to Admiral Prescott. The leak had worked. The story was now one step from public scandal. Prescott knew that once the media latched on, the narrative would spin out of control. He needed to control the revelation. He made another call, this time to a retired Marine Master Gunnery Sergeant named Frank Decker, who ran a small, influential non-profit advocating for wounded and ill female veterans. Decker had been a legend in the force recon community and had the ear of several powerful members of Congress. Prescott gave him the unvarnished truth. Within hours, Decker was on the phone with the staff of the House Armed Services Committee. Back at Camp Lejeune, Lieutenant Vance was placed in a holding pattern, assigned temporary duty at the base gym. It was there that Sergeant Thorpe found her, lifting weights alone. His confrontation wasn't aggressive this time, it was confused. "Why didn't you just tell us?" he asked, his voice low. Vance racked the barbell and turned to face him. "Tell you what, Sergeant, that I'd seen combat, that I'd been blown up. Would that have made you respect me, or just make you find another reason to test me? The problem wasn't my silence. It was your assumption that silence meant I had nothing to say." Thorpe had no answer. As he walked away, he was intercepted by Sergeant Torres, who had been listening. "You still don't get it, Thorpe. She wasn't hiding, she was enduring, and we failed the test." The institutional gears continued to grind. General Crowder, the commandant, was briefed. He reviewed the files and the escalating political interest. He saw a perfect storm, a potential public relations disaster, a challenge to the Corps integrity, and a fundamental leadership failure. He made a decision that shocked both General Hale and Admiral Prescott. He ordered a public regiment-level formation at Camp Lejeune for the following week. The entire School of Infantry Training Regiment, over 1,000 Marines, would assemble. The purpose: to address standards, integrity, and to correct the record. He did not specify what record, The order was unprecedented. When Captain Miller received the order, he knew it was over. The commandant doesn't involve himself in battalion-level disputes unless it's catastrophic. Panicked, he tried to call his friend in public affairs again, but the line went straight to voicemail. The friend had been reassigned to temporary duty at Quantico, effectively silenced. Then the second, more devastating revelation hit. As part of the commandant's investigation, a forensic audit of the training command's injury reports was ordered. The data was shocking, but not for the reasons Miller feared. It showed that in the 2 years since women had been integrated into the combat instructor course, the overall injury rate had dropped by 15%. Why? Because the first female candidates, like Vance, had been so determined to prove themselves they had overtrained, leading to stress fractures and overuse injuries. The course had since been adjusted, and the current training regimen, in part shaped by the experiences of those early women, was now safer and more effective for everyone. The data proved that integration, managed correctly, made the course stronger, not weaker. Miller had been fighting a phantom, and the evidence was now on its way to the commandant's desk. Admiral Prescott visited Vance in her temporary quarters. The formation is in 4 days. The commandant will be there. He intends to set the record straight. I need to know what you want, Lieutenant. A private apology, a public commendation, a transfer to a special operations training billet where you belong. Vance thought for a long moment. Sir, I didn't want any of this. I wanted to be a good instructor. But if this formation is happening, then it's not about what I want. It's about what the Corps needs. They need to see that the cost of this kind of failure isn't just hurt feelings, it's wasted talent and broken trust. Prescott nodded. Then you'll be on the platform. The night before the formation, Captain Miller was summoned by the Camp Lejeune base commander. He was presented with the injury audit findings and the full Iron Shield file. He was told that at the formation, he would be relieved of his instructor duties and reassigned pending further review. His career was effectively finished. As he left the office, he was met by Sergeant Thorpe and a group of candidates. Thorpe, to his credit, spoke for them. Captain, we need to know the truth, not the rumor. The truth, eh? Defeated, Miller told them. He told them about the IED, the ambush, the medal, the classified program. The candidates listened in stunned silence. When he finished, Torres asked the question that would haunt Miller. Why did we think mocking her was acceptable, sir? Miller had no answer. The stage was set. Over 1,000 Marines in crisp uniforms formed up on the main parade deck under gray Carolina sky. The commandant, General Crowder, stood on the reviewing platform with Admiral Prescott and the base commander. Lieutenant Vance stood at the rear of the platform in her service uniform, her medals, including the previously unseen Navy Commendation Medal with Valor, finally on her chest. The scars on her face were visible to all. General Crowder stepped to the microphone. His voice was firm and carried across the silent formation. Marines, we are here today because of a failure of leadership, a failure of camaraderie, and a failure to uphold our core values. This failure occurred in one of our most sacred institutions, our trainer development pipeline. It involved the harassment of a fellow Marine based on appearance and assumption. He paused, letting the words sink in. That Marine is Lieutenant Elara Vance. Her service record, which some in this command sought to discredit, is a testament to valor. She served in a classified capacity in one of the most dangerous theaters of war, was wounded in action, and performed with exceptional heroism. She then chose to continue serving by training you, and for that, she was met with ridicule. A wave of palpable shame rolled through the formation. Crowder continued, but this is not just about one Marine. It is about a culture that sometimes values toughness over wisdom, aggression over understanding. We integrated women into combat roles not to lower standards, but to raise them. The data proves it, and yet some cling to outdated notions that weaken us all. He then turned and gestured for Vance to step forward. The entire formation watched as she walked to the front of the platform, standing at attention beside the commandant. It was a monumental gesture of solidarity. Lieutenant Vance, Crowder said, his voice now more personal, the United States Marine Corps owes you an apology, and so do the Marines of this command. Then, without any order given, a ripple moved through the mass of Marines. It started with Sergeant Torres in the front rank. He came to attention and rendered a sharp, perfect salute. The Marine beside him followed, then another and another, until like a wave, over 1,000 Marines were standing at rigid attention, saluting Lieutenant Vance. It was a spontaneous, unprecedented display of respect. On the platform, Captain Miller, standing with the other instructors off to the side, closed his eyes. Admiral Prescott watched, his expression solemn. Vance, facing the sea of saluting Marines, remained at attention, her eyes fixed on the horizon, but this time there was a slight sheen to them. General Crowder nodded, then spoke his final words into the microphone, words that would be quoted across the Marine Corps for years. Honor isn't about who can yell the loudest or endure the most pain. It's about recognizing sacrifice wherever it comes from. Remember this day. Dismissed. The formation broke, but the story was far from over, because as the Marines marched off the parade deck, a staff officer hurried to the commandant with an urgent message. The media inquiry had just been published online. The headline was explosive and wrong: Marine Corps investigating fraudulent combat claims by female officer. The counter-narrative, seeded by Miller's initial call, was now public. And it was about to force Lieutenant Vance and the entire Marine Corps into a fight they never wanted, on a battlefield where the truth is often the first casualty. The public war for her reputation had just begun. The online article was a wildfire. Marine Corps investigating fraudulent combat claims by female officer. For the public, and for skeptical media, this was a sensational scandal. For the Marine Corps, it was a five-alarm crisis of credibility. Admiral Prescott and General Crowder now had 48 hours to dismantle a false narrative before it cemented in the national consciousness, and the only way to do it was to take the unprecedented step of declassifying the truth. General Crowder made the decision in his Pentagon office. We released the sanitized after-action report from Operation Iron Shield. We redact names, locations, and unit designations, but we release the facts of the ambush, the citations for valor, and the medical records confirming the origin of Lieutenant Vance's injuries. And we do it at a press briefing with her present. The Marine Corps never does this. Classified operations stay classified, but this was a unique poison requiring a unique antidote. The press briefing was scheduled for 2 days later. The invitation list included every major news outlet and the defense journalists who had published the initial story. For those 2 days, Lieutenant Vance was sequestered in a base quarters, assisted by a public affairs officer and a lawyer. She was prepped for the hardest questions, the most intrusive scrutiny. Through it all, she maintained her steely calm. When asked if she was angry, she said, "Anger is a luxury. My job is to represent the Marines who served in silence, not just myself." Meanwhile, the institutional consequences began to land. Captain Miller was formally charged with conduct unbecoming an officer, failure to obey a lawful order for encouraging a hostile environment, and making false official statements. He was offered a choice: a court-martial or resignation. He resigned, his 20-year career ending not with retirement honors, but with a terse press release. Sergeant Thorpe faced non-judicial punishment. He was fined, reduced in rank, and given a punitive transfer. But in a private meeting with his battalion commander, he did something unexpected. He requested that his demotion and transfer be made public within the regiment. "The others need to see that actions have consequences, sir," he said. "I owe Lieutenant Vance that much." The day of the press briefing arrived. The Pentagon briefing room was packed. Admiral Prescott and Lieutenant Vance sat at the table, with General Crowder standing at the podium. The commandant did not mince words. 48 hours ago, an article was published containing false and defamatory information about one of our Marines. That article was based on a malicious and unsubstantiated leak. Today, we correct the record, and we hold ourselves accountable. He outlined the sequence of events at Camp Lejeune, the hazing, the cover-up of Vance's record, and the investigation. Then he turned to the screen. What you are about to see is a redacted but verified summary of Lieutenant Ilara Vance's service during Operation Iron Shield. The screen displayed maps, timelines, and redacted reports. It detailed the convoy ambush, the coordinates, the number of enemy combatants. It showed the citation for the Navy Commendation Medal with Valor, describing how then Sergeant Vance disregarded her own serious wounds to pull two teammates from a burning vehicle and establish a defensive perimeter under sustained enemy fire. The final slide was a side-by-side comparison, her official MP service record next to the classified file. The difference was damning. General Crowder then introduced Vance. Lieutenant Vance has answered the call in combat, and she has answered it in training. She will now answer your questions. The first question from the journalist who wrote the original article was aggressive. Lieutenant, if your record is so distinguished, why was it hidden? Isn't that convenient? Vance leaned into the microphone. It wasn't hidden for my convenience. The program I served in was politically sensitive and was terminated. The Marine Corps made a decision to reassign personnel quietly. I followed orders. I wore the uniform I was given and did the job I was assigned. My convenience was never a factor. Another reporter asked, "Do you believe you were treated unfairly because you're a woman?" Vance paused, choosing her words carefully. I was treated unfairly because people made assumptions. My gender was one data point they used to make those assumptions. My silence was another. The real failure was a leadership culture that allowed those assumptions to replace curiosity and respect. Then the surprise moment. Admiral Prescott interjected. There is one more piece of information. The medical audit of the training command, initiated because of this incident, revealed something vital. In the 2 years since integration, injury rates have dropped by 15%. The adaptations made to train a more diverse force have made that force stronger and safer. Lieutenant Vance didn't just endure a broken system. Her presence helped expose how to fix it. The press briefing shifted the narrative entirely. Headlines the next day read, Marine Corps exposes own cover-up to vindicate decorated officer, and data shows integration made Marines safer. In the weeks that followed, the changes were tangible. Lieutenant Vance was not returned to the combat instructor course. Instead, she was offered a position at the Marine Corps Special Operations Command, MASOC, as an instructor in their Cultural Support and Integration Training Cell, finally using her hard-won experience in its proper context. She accepted. Sergeant Torres and several other candidates from the course wrote a formal letter to the training command, advocating for revised ethics training that addressed unconscious bias and leadership failures. Their proposal was approved for pilot testing. The final private act of closure happened at the Camp Lejeune Base Chapel. Captain Miller, now a civilian, requested a meeting with Vance before he left the base. He stood before her, looking diminished. "I have no excuse," he said. "I was afraid of change, and I targeted you because you embodied it. I'm sorry." Vance looked at him for a long moment. "Apology accepted, Captain, but understand, this wasn't about you and me. It was about the next Lieutenant Vance who walks into a hangar. Because of this, maybe they won't have to prove what they've already earned. That's the only thing that matters." As she walked away, Miller was left with the hollow understanding that his legacy would be a cautionary tale in instructor school, while hers was being written into the future of the Corps. 1 year later, Lieutenant Ilara Vance stood on a different parade deck at MASOC. She was pinning the coveted Special Warfare insignia on a group of graduates, including several female Marines she had trained. In the audience, watching with quiet pride, was Admiral Prescott, now retired. After the ceremony, he approached her. "You look at home, Lieutenant." "It feels like it, sir," she replied. He handed her a small, folded memo. It was a copy of a new Marine Corps directive, one she hadn't seen. It mandated the full integration of combat award records into personnel files, regardless of classification level, to prevent future administrative erasure. At the bottom, in the comments section, was a note, "Directive inspired by case of Lieutenant E. Vance. Ensure she receives copy. Crowder." Vance read it, a faint smile touching her lips. It was the quiet, bureaucratic confirmation that her ordeal had changed something real. The scars on her face, once a target for mockery, were now simply a part of her, acknowledged but no longer her defining feature. She had transitioned from a casualty of a broken system to an architect of a better one. The story of the laughing hangar and the Admiral who stood had reached its end, but its lessons were just beginning to circulate through the bloodstream of the Marine Corps. It was a lesson about the cost of assumptions, the strength found in resilience, and the fact that true honor isn't bestowed by rank alone, but earned through the courage to stand for what's right, even when you stand alone. And sometimes, especially then. The story of Lieutenant Ilara Vance is not an isolated incident of one person's resilience, but a revealing case study of an institution confronting its own evolution. While her record was corrected and her detractors held accountable, her experience forces us to ask a more uncomfortable question. How many other stories remain buried under bureaucracy and bias, and what talent has been lost because the system was too rigid to recognize it? The data is clear. Women in combat training are injured at more than twice the rate of men, often battling equipment and regimens designed for a different physiology. Many carry the dual burdens of visible scars and invisible trauma, with female veterans experiencing PTSD at more than double the rate of their male counterparts. Lieutenant Vance's journey from a mocked candidate to a respected MAISOC instructor shows that the solution isn't lowering standards, but intelligently adapting systems to unlock the full potential of every volunteer. The 15% drop in injury rates after integration proves that point decisively. Admiral Prescott's simple act of standing was more than a rebuke. It was a signal that leadership means protecting your people from each other, not just from the enemy. Captain Miller's resignation and Sergeant Thorpe's demotion are not victories, but necessary corrections in a culture that often mistakes cruelty for toughness. The real victory is in the new directive ensuring combat awards are never again administratively erased, and in the candidates who now understand that the quietest person in the room may be the most capable. For every Lieutenant Vance whose story reaches a resolution, how many others navigate their service with their sacrifices unacknowledged, their skills underestimated? The challenge for any organization, especially one built on honor, is to constantly audit its own culture for these silent failures. Respect isn't given by rank. It's built through the daily decision to see the person behind the uniform, the story behind the scar. If you were inspired by this story of hidden strength and the courage it takes to stand against the current, make sure you've subscribed to this channel. We bring you the deepest dives into the most incredible true stories of people who changed their worlds, often without anyone noticing until it was too late to look away. Your subscription helps us uncover and share these vital narratives. Thank you for watching.